Welcome back to another episode of the Association Spotlight Series. We have a new guest with us here today. Dustin, you like to introduce yourself and tell everyone who you are and where you're from?
My name's Dustin Contos. I'm currently a master's level therapist at the Williamson Health and Wellness Center.
Oh, great. Yep. Good deal. And you, I know, and our listeners are about to find out some more, you have an incredibly unique story of how you've kind of your winding journey. That's what's led you to behavioral health, and we can hop in.
It's not traditional.
It's unlike any I've heard. So we're really excited to talk to you today. And again, thanks for coming up and spending some time with us and tell your story a little bit. And we can maybe just hop right into it and how you kind of got started, what you did before your career in behavioral health.
Well, first off, I really appreciate you having me. It's honestly a pleasure to be here and get to know you guys too, especially from coming from the conference that we met briefly.
Yep.
It's been a real joy to get to mingle with everybody and get to know everybody.
Likewise,
But for me, I started off as a West Virginia State Trooper. Growing up, I never ever in a million years would have thought that's where I would have ended up, but I did, and I worked in Mingo County, West Virginia for 10 years. Mm-hmm. With that career, there was a ton of ups and downs. I always said when I left the academy, we done a flood detail in Logan, and then that transitioned into Mingo County. I always said, if I get stationed in Mingo, I will quit. I said that. I really did. And then they called my name out, and it was Williamson, which is in Mingo. So,
sure.
But it's honestly been the best thing that's ever happened to me. The people that I've got to work with and know have been truly an inspiration to me. Really makes the transition that I made a big part of that too, because I got to know people on a personal level as a trooper. And I'm talking about the people that I would deal with as far as, lawbreakers, if you will.
Yep.
But I would take the time to listen, and I wouldn't look at them as just a statistic or, this is a domestic case and that's it. I always kind of been compelled to make a difference, and it feels really good to see that difference being made, and as a result of something you've done, I can look back on my career and see that there were several things that I've done that I did make a difference on. I've had several abuse and neglect cases, that little kids that had no business being in a certain situation, that I know if it wasn't for what I'd done, they would have probably still been in that situation.
Right.
So I really look at those things as impactful, difference-making type things. But I got to the point in my career where it just seemed like I wasn't making a difference. It just seemed like no matter what I did, nothing changed. It was the same names, the same stories. There were some that I spoke with about their drug issue, and it was always the same or very similar. It was always that they weren't proud of it, that they wanted help, and I felt completely helpless whenever they were telling me that, because I just got them to tell me all these things that are bothering them and personal things in a matter of sitting down, getting to know someone over a criminal matter. They get to the point where they disclose all these personal issues they're struggling with, and I have no options. It's okay now. I'll have to take you to the regional jail, and I'll do the best I can to help you, but that's
at that point
all my power at that point.
Right.
And then you kind of walk that fine line between, to me, is jail a rehabilitation or is it a punishment? And it's kind of, you really don't get to be both, I don't think.
Right.
At least it doesn't seem that way. So I would build a relationship with people. I still see people that I've had to interact with in that capacity as a trooper that I have great relationships with. I tried to see them as a person.
Right.
And then as my career went on, I told you I felt like I wasn't doing that. I didn't see a pathway out for me. Like, what else is there?
Yeah.
At that point, it was kind of like, this is your career. This is where you're going to be at. This is where you're going to retire from.
Yeah.
But I met an individual that I know you know. My wife was working for him. His name's Duran Warren. And I've come to find out that me and him had a whole lot more in common than I thought. And we got to talking, and I told him about my psychology background, and he turned me on to a program that was a 2-year master's program, and he was like, you can do it. And I was like, there's no way, work and everything else, this ship has sailed. But,
Yeah.
But he planted a seed, and that seed grew and sprouted, and as it did, I kind of decided to take that leap, and I went back to school while I was working, and I got my master's degree, and then I made the switch to this. So it was not an easy transition at first, but it was something that I felt was necessary.
Sure. Yeah, and I think that's a great point to touch on too. A little bit back was we talking about these are people, and you don't see them just as a statistic. And I think so many times, as long as this conversation is going on in the opioid epidemic and everything around, especially in the southern part of West Virginia, we're so used to hearing it, and you hear about it all the time, and all these people, and it seems that it has become more of a statistic and things you see on a report and numbers and where we compare with other states, and I think that does get lost. These are real people with real stories and not so different than any of us.
Absolutely.
And it takes maybe just one or two bad breaks of something to happen in their life to lead them down that path, and I'm glad you said that, because it's not just a statistic. They're West Virginians, they're our neighbors, and I think the more folks that kind of try to remember that, I think that we all collectively could keep battling it and get it in a better place.
Well, I think it's important to be honest, and with me, I think that's something that I struggled with as well as a state trooper. You see nothing but negative. You don't. I can't tell you how many times I got called to, hey, this little old lady needs escorted across the street, and somebody's doing that voluntarily. I don't get those things.
No.
It's always the most heinous things that you don't want to see, or the things that you shouldn't see.
Sure.
You should never walk in a scene and see a 6-year-old with a bullet hole in her head.
No.
That is not something you want to see.
No, yeah.
But that's what you see.
Yep,
and typically, more often than not, the end result would be there's a drug issue of some sort, and so you kind of got jaded. Yeah, you got very jaded. You started losing that at some point. I felt that.
Yeah.
And I remember when Suboxone was like a big thing. I remember at the time I was thinking that you're just trading one for another. This is not okay. This is ridiculous. But it took me opening up my mind and listening to people. And what really changed it for me was I had a family friend and we went on vacations with, and he disclosed to me that he was on Suboxone, and that I knew he had a background in substance use, but I didn't know that that's where he was at. And he was talking to me about it, and I was like, well, hold on a second. Maybe everything I'm seeing is not accurate. And here's a guy who has got his life back. He's a productive member of society. He's working, he's married, he's involved with his kids. I would have never guessed that he was taking Suboxone, and it was prescribed. And that's where I kind of started really opening that door a little bit more as to maybe there's more here than what I'm
It's not
seeing.
just binary. It's not one or the other. There is from a different perspective there that could work. Oh yeah.
And we're much closer to, like you mentioned, we're much closer to that than you realize. And I think for me, it was something I had to really come to grips with. I had a drinking issue, and to say I had a problem was something I had a hard time with, because buy it in the store. I'm justifying
this
it.
Is legal.
Everybody does it. Look at the commercials. Look at that. There's a frog or whatever that's making it sounds really cool. Like, all these people having a good time. Everybody does it and justify it. But whenever it's become something that interferes with your life, and it was, well, then maybe you have a problem, and you're just one decision away from being right where somebody in active addiction is. With opioid epidemic type stuff.
Right.
And I think we're all very close to that, and we kind of lose sight of it.
Sure. Yeah, and I know we had discussed a little bit earlier. You had talked about an incident as a state trooper that was tough on you and your family even more so.
Yes,
it's
sir.
kind of a part of the transition into behavioral health. Maybe a lot less violent. Whatever word you want to use for it. Being on the scene there of that incident, I know it was tough on your family as well.
Well, I think the incident you're referring to was in 2014, August of 2014. My wife and I had our first son, and my first day back from maternity leave, I end up on a call that started off as a single vehicle accident, which you're thinking that is nothing. I mean, half the time, if there's no property damage or anything, there's not even a report done. But this one turned into an officer-involved shooting. The worst part about that was that, with it being my first day back from maternity leave, I had left my portable radio at the house and on, so my wife and daughter heard everything. They heard all the radio traffic. They heard my wife's husband, my daughter's father and my brother-in-law actually was a trooper, and he was responding to that as well. They hear all that on the radio. So they're very impacted by that. And at the time, I knew what I had done was something that I had to do. It wasn't what I wanted to do.
Right.
Never, ever anticipated that as something you would have to actually do in your career. It's not what you sign up for. But after you cross that bridge, it was like, well, that's not fun. And we spoke about this earlier too, where Mingo County is a very hometown, everybody knows, everybody feel.
Yep.
My kids go to school with the person who I shot's kids.
Yep.
And that's impactful.
Absolutely. Yep.
Regardless of whether it was right or wrong. It
happened.
Still somebody's life is lost as a result of this decision here.
Yep.
And I remember kind of mandatorily having to seek, counseling, and that was not what I expected by any means. It was more or less, how do you feel? Good. Check, you're back to work. And by that next week, we were back on duty. You know? Even though I was back on duty, my family life was not back in order. My wife and daughter, I think, still struggle with it to this day, to some degree. And we didn't really have anywhere to turn to at the time. It felt like that anyway. And then a few short months after that, my father committed suicide. And like I said, I kind of struggled with drinking. And after my first son was born, that was off the table. Like that. Before that, it was even, when I got married, we both kind of decided that if this marriage is going to last, we got to put the childish things aside. And we did that. But everything in my life was in shambles at that time. And everything in me was telling me to go drink.
Right.
But what I ended up doing was I went to work, and I mean work. I stayed at work. I worked everything, coming and going.
Yeah.
My cases, everybody else's cases, city cases, county cases, whatever I could get my hands on. The end result was I ended up being named the 2016 Trooper of the Year and Superintendent Award winner.
Wow. Yeah.
That's nice to be recognized.
Sure.
But years later, I kind of look back at that as more of a learning point than anything. I can't tell you what I did in 2016 that deserves an award. I can tell you what I did in 2012 and 14 and 18. I can point to specific things that I know I made a difference on.
Right.
I can't in 16. I can't.
No.
But that's what I got recognized for.
Yeah.
So, it's a nice thing. It speaks to achievement, but it also, to me, serves as a reminder, because it wasn't long after that my wife was like, hey, something's got to change, because you are not here at all. Even when you are here, you're not here.
Sure. And there's, of course, the worry, too, of you being in active duty, as a trooper. I'm sure that's just the everyday worry, I'm sure, from the family.
Especially after that, she listened to that radio call. It was something that never... It was always something that I feel was on her mind every time I went to work.
I'm sure. I mean, how can it not be? And do you think, too, with, like you said, with after all these big events that are very traumatic and things that happen, do you think that you overloaded with staying busy with work in a way to maybe not address all these things because they were big? So
That's
you kind
exactly
of staying busy and never
exactly
really dealing with them down and working through them, right?
I just was like an ostrich, I stuck my head in the sand and pretended it wasn't going on.
Right. Just stayed busy.
That was my way of coping with the time.
And like we had discussed a little bit earlier too, with positions maybe like a state trooper or other similar things like that. And as a man, you're not always. It's not always welcoming to maybe talk about your feelings or things that you have to show the masculinity. You have to you're almost, just suppress it and things like that. So you can't feel, you feel a little bit alone with that.
Well, I think that was a big part of that as well. I think, as a state trooper, when you show up on a scene, you're expected to take control immediately. It's not like halfway through it. It is immediately. As soon as you arrive, you take control. I think at work was the only time I felt like I was in control.
Okay.
So I stayed there. That is a big part of it. The other part of it is that you can't show weakness. And so if I disclose to you that I'm struggling with this and I'm struggling with that, then that's weakness. And if I show you that, that's something that causes me to lose in a future setting. That's the mindset.
Sure. Yeah.
But once I went back to school and naturally I was still a state trooper while I was going to school, so I was kind of geared towards first responders. So every time we had an assignment or a project to do, that's kind of where my mind went. And it was shocking to me, some of the statistics that I was coming up with. Like it was talking about how you are more likely, as a law enforcement officer specifically, to die by suicide than you are an on-duty related event. And that means car accidents, shootings,
wow,
whatever.
Yeah.
And I remember really digesting that and looking at the numbers and everything and thinking, we spend so much time training for a threat that is a physical threat to us.
Sure.
But we give zero attention to the mental threat. That's,
right.
Instead of me shooting at a paper target twice a year to qualify and running 1.5 miles and doing sit-ups and push-ups, all of that is important. I'm not saying it's not.
Right.
But I'm saying, instead of doing all that, maybe you should look at some of the other issues too.
Yeah, there's a gap in the system there.
There's a huge gap.
Yeah.
And
the culture and
the culture.
Yeah.
But the culture has its good points too.
Oh, of course. But yeah.
But you look at most statistics also point out that divorce, high rate.
Yeah.
Suicide, high rate, and substance use or substance abuse is a high rate. And so where do you turn when you feel like you can't turn anywhere? That's kind of where that goes.
Right. Yeah. So that's tough. So, fast forward now in your role here, and it's it's a much different speed. I'm sure. It's
It's definitely different.
Would you say? I guess they're transitioning, like you said, you've been in this role now for about 2 years. Is that what you said?
Yeah, I'm coming up on that.
Oh, coming up. So it's still relatively new, but have you some things that you've maybe taken from your time as a state trooper that have been an advantage and beneficial to you now as a counselor, or maybe, and also the other side of that question, some things that have maybe been harder to turn off from you're by default for so long as a state trooper. Sometimes you have to catch yourself and think, okay, I can't respond this way, or is there anything like, I guess, the good and the bad of making that transition? Have you experienced it?
I'll probably address the last part of that first, because I don't know that I really have encountered any of the bad. I think
good.
And honestly, the bad part of that was it was hard for me to transition just to being a normal person.
Yeah, maybe not bad. I guess like the things that maybe took a little bit more effort.
That took a lot a lot of time to be able to sit a certain way at a restaurant and not worry, and still yet that takes a lot of I have to really do some mental gymnastics to get that to happen.
I bet.
But I was always looking for that threat, or always prepared and preparing for the worst situation and expecting the worst. And, it took me a long time to kind of reel that back in a little bit.
I bet.
But the good, I think just the way I went about my job in general really kind of transitioned to being a counselor. I tell a lot of the guys now that I used to work with that all I'm doing now is I'm just focusing on one part of the job I used to do.
Sure.
The interview process, and with that, what do? You're getting to know somebody on a deeper level.
Right.
Whenever I'm interviewing somebody on a crime, I'm reading below the surface. And as a counselor, what am I doing? I'm reading below the surface. I'm listening to what you're saying, but I'm reading your body language and listening to what it's saying. And if they don't match, well, then I should probably ask a follow-up question to try to kind of get further there. I think that part of it has made me very effective as a counselor.
Absolutely. It was almost like you were training within that anyway. It's like you kind of had it in mind. You already had those skills and a passion for it, and you've just really honed it in.
That's something I enjoyed a lot as a trooper, was the investigative process, which also included
and helping
the interview.
people.
And the making a difference. And to me, it has been so much more rewarding. It's like a breath of fresh air to see that. And I'll be honest, I have patients that I've personally arrested in the past.
I bet.
And it's really rewarding to see progress being made in their lives. As before, I got to know them, I got to know their family, I got to know their problems, but then I would take them to the jail, and then I'd see them at court and be like, hey, how's mom and them, and what's going on in your life,
checking in.
Hey, you ready to go to rehab? Or what's your where you at? And really where you're at whenever they come back to that and start talking to you about it is, well, now I'm even further behind the 8 ball, and now I've got all these jail costs and stuff to kind of pay back, and well, I can't get a job because I'm on parole, and it seems like you may be doing a good thing, and I'm not saying it's not, but it goes back to what I said earlier: is it rehabilitation or is it punishment? And you can't really do both. You kind of got to look at where that goes, and so now I'm getting to pick up the pieces and look at, well, why were you doing some of the things that you were doing, and what are some options that we can kind of turn to here?
Right.
And when you see somebody that you used to arrest on a regular basis get a full-time job, be involved with their family, have a driver's license for the first time since they were 17, that's to me worth everything.
Oh wow, I can imagine.
It's
That's
so rewarding.
It has
to
be
so rewarding.
Yeah, they probably are, sometimes they see it like, hold on, you're doing this now? Is there any?
Yeah, oh man.
They're like, hold on, they quite can't, you know.
The funny thing, I'll tell you, I had.
There's probably gonna be some of those.
Oh,
Yeah.
this is hilarious. They when I first started, and I wasn't even like hired there yet. I was doing like shadow process.
Sure.
The rumor got started that I was going undercover and was kind of working.
Don't tell this guy anything.
Yeah, don't tell him anything. No. He's undercover. He's still a trooper.
Right. That gets into the small town thing too, like you said. You know, everyone, and they're like, "Wait a second, this guy. Hold on, he's a counselor now."
Yeah, but I always
sure.
I always kind of fall back to maybe a handful of interactions that I had in my 10-year career that weren't the greatest.
Yeah.
I always tried to do the best I could with every situation and look at the whole picture instead of just the small thing. And I that's really benefited me because I've had patients seek me out because of that. Like, I listened to them when they were at their worst.
Right.
I know if I take that step on my own, he's going to listen to me then for sure. And so I've had that. I've had some personally come there and seek me that I've arrested, and just because I had that relationship with them before.
Yeah, there's some trust there.
Yeah, there's trust.
Yeah.
I tried to operate that way. If I said something, I followed through with it. You know, to me, I think that's, like I mentioned earlier, being honest about things is important for every aspect. And so that's the way I try to carry myself with my patients too.
Sure. Yeah. So with a unique transition into the behavioral health world, what would you maybe say to someone looking into a career in that world that maybe isn't so sure? I know you've been only a couple of years, but you kind of already have touched on the rewarding aspects of it. But it does. I mean, what would you maybe tell a young person, or not anyone at any age making the transition or possible career?
To me, the first advice I give whenever it's asked is that the reward for you is second to none. I think the reward for the patient is even better. And as long as you focus on the patient, and you kind of, the catchphrase is you meet them where they are at, but it'll take you some time to figure that out, what that means.
Right. Yeah.
Meeting them where they are. And once you do, you can kind of set your expectations based off of that, and you can see the little progress being made. With that, it's balls in your court what you do with it.
Sure.
There's so much opportunity. There's so many different avenues you can go down with this career. You and I were just talking earlier about the first responders. It seems to be a field that's kind of not really given a lot of attention, especially when it comes to mental health.
Oh yeah.
And I understand that coming from that background, but I would love to go into that because the trauma that they see and the family relationship dynamic there is deserving of the attention.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's quite a load that they take on.
And I think we just had a little gathering at our facility for like a law enforcement or first responder appreciation luncheon. And how do you really show them that you appreciate them? Right. And to me, I think it goes a little further than just being able to provide a meal. Maybe it's providing that support to really get them that life that they're capable of having with their family, and finding that balance so that you're not turning to something else.
Right.
And that goes with everybody. That's another thing I've learned a lot about too, is as you go on with your counseling career, you end up making tons of adjustments in your own life.
Sure.
Oh man.
And I'm sure mostly positive, of course,
absolutely.
Right? Yeah,
absolutely.
You're finding out about yourself while you're
Absolutely.
also learning about other people.
Absolutely.
And you can apply them.
Absolutely, and it has been truly rewarding in every aspect.
Oh, well, that's great. It sounds like a home run. And you know what? I assume that most days you're home at 5 p.m., right?
Yeah, my wife don't have to worry where I'm at. We currently work together, so she knows everything.
Exactly, exactly.
The small talk's gone, so that's completely gone. I did this at work today. She already knows. That's off the table.
Sure, it's a much more manageable work-life, home-life balance.
It's a much more manageable life, and like I said, the possibilities are endless. If you want to go into schools, you want to work with children, you want to work with substance use, you want to work with domestic violence, it's all there, and there's so many different avenues you can go down theories that you can kind of explore to be effective. It's never ending.
Yeah,
I like that aspect of it.
Oh yeah, you're still going and you're never done, and you're not plateauing. You can just keep it going as high as you'd like.
And that's the other thing that somebody asked me before I transitioned to making the move. Somebody asked me if I thought that I was going to miss like the adrenaline rush or the
sure,
all the high speed chase and stuff like that. And you know, there's a time that those were fun, but to me it was always about the big picture. And when you look at that, it kind of goes away to me. But you kind of still have that engagement in that process. If I've got a patient who is, you know, they're on the verge of losing everything and they're in active addiction, and well, where do you meet them at? You know, that's my rush now is like I got to try to figure out how we can get on the same page and then build this relationship to get to your goals, and that's kind of a never-ending process in of itself.
Sure, because it's just a different speed, but the stakes are just as high.
Just as high.
Yeah, and action is really required and needed to save the situation.
And you've got to be on your game, and you have to be listening, actually listening, and really, you never know what they're going to bring in there. You know, I had a patient here recently that was very resistant for most of my time with them, very resistant. And I mean, we've had treatment teams with this patient and everything else, but they came in and just randomly kind of started talking about some really personal stuff and broke down crying. And if I would have told anybody else in those treatment teams that that's what this patient did, they would have told me I was lying, because it's just a resistant brick wall of a patient. You know? But if you are patient and you work with them and you constantly are listening and trying to get to their level and find out where they're at, eventually it happens. And when it does, you can see the progress being made. And that's what's rewarding to me.
Oh yeah, that's a win. That's a huge win.
Oh, it is. Yeah. It is. And when you finally see the person happy with where they're going, whether it's behavioral health or substance abuse, when their quality of life improves as a result of that relationship that you've kind of formed with them to work together towards something, you can't beat it.
No, that's it. Well, Dustin, thanks so much for joining us today. I wish you the best of luck, and it's exciting for you, and keep on going.
I will, sir. I will, and I really appreciate you having me. Like I said, I could talk your ear off.
We could. You know what? I'm sure we'll love to have you back on here in the future too.
Season 2, episode 20.
We've just scratched the surface, haven't we?
That's right. That's right.
All right. Well, thank you.